AI is going to redefine every aspect of human life, for the way we work to the way we play and the way we connect with each other. At High, all of us are intently focused on some of these pressing questions about what it means to be human in the world of AI.
How do we live well with our technologies?
How do we promote autonomy, fairness, rule of law?
What is the kind of world we want? Do we want a world of shared prosperity?
Whether we as free societies can keep the kind of agency over artificial intelligence that allows us to decide what it will mean in our lives.
These are the questions that keep us awake at night.
Human-centered artificial intelligence, to me, is a framework to develop AI, to deploy AI, to govern AI, to really frankly think about AI. It's fundamentally a tool that humans build to make our lives better, to help people.
The mission of High is basically to try as best we can to guide the technology in the most beneficial possible direction for humanity.
We're one of the very first higher education institutes that recognize this important technology and this important mission.
And we wanted to create a next generation of artificial intelligence technology which is more sensitive to human beings and hopefully points in the direction of a more just society.
And what I find here is this enormous sense of curiosity. People are really driven to understand where the technology is today, what it means for society, but also where it might go in the future. I learn something new, not even every day, every hour here.
Stanford's one of the most collaborative places I've ever been for people who have this curiosity and this intellectual interest in mind. It's like a candy store.
High is special mostly in the community that we have built, and it is a highly interdisciplinary community. We have people from every single part of the university, which is quite something.
This interdisciplinary part that's built into our DNA, it's who we are, and it's a really key part of understanding AI more broadly.
It's really bringing different fields and areas of expertise together to discover new things. Why is this important? Because this is where the unknowns are. As we deepen our knowledge in different areas, there's always going to be sparks that happen, sparks of new ideas, sparks of new possibilities, sparks of new knowledge we haven't yet to discover, sparks of new questions to ask when we bridge these different disciplines together.
I have never seen a technology or a change move so quickly as AI has. AI is going to be a technology that is going to disrupt everything.
We have so many people embracing AI, but we have so many people being worried about AI. So the urgency is only increased. The urgency to accomplish High's mission.
So good morning, everyone. 5 years ago, we came before you in this very room to introduce what was at the time a novel idea, an academic institute that would focus not only on advancing AI technology, but on understanding the technology's impact on people, society, and civilization. When we first envisioned an institute for human-centered AI, we knew it had to be radically interdisciplinary. We needed the involvement of economists and philosophers. We needed the involvement of business and education researchers, physicians and legal scholars, all in addition to our core AI experts. In 2019, we embarked on this impossible dream and we called it HI. We brought forward the world's first, and to this day only, interdisciplinary AI institute focused on human-centered values. We were emboldened by this vision and impelled by the knowledge that this nascent technology would fundamentally disrupt humanity. And wow, have we come far.
Indeed, wow, what a 5 years for both HI and the whole world of AI. We have seen extraordinary breakthroughs in our field, including the beginning and taking off of the generative AI revolution. In just short few years, we have seen that multimodal foundation models, whether it's language, images, music, videos, like GPT, Gemini, Llama, completely taking the world by storm. We have seen critical healthcare advances, such as the remarkable accuracy in the field of medical imaging, stunning breakthroughs in predicting protein structure, and advances in targeted drug discovery. And now we're seeing the taking off of robotics, using reinforcement learning and imitation learning to teach robots tasks that require impressive dexterity and adaptability. So while all these advances are allowing us to make extraordinary lifelike images or taking us to new worlds and times, it has also opened doors even wider to deepfakes that undermine factuality and could even threaten democracy worldwide. One thing we recognize from the very earliest days of HI was AI's potential for both positive and negative impact. In the past 5 years, AI has arguably catapulted to a top 3 issue for governments around the world. Concerns about the technology have gone from the lab to the kitchen table to the halls of Congress. Policymakers have reacted quickly to this moment, more so than many other past moments in history, ushering in new regulations and guidelines from the EU AI Act to a sweeping US executive order to new legislations percolating in the state of California, just as examples. Policymakers grappling with the challenges of AI are compelled to understand nuances, such as what AI will do to jobs or our workforce. Do we need to rethink our privacy and intellectual property laws? What will the environmental impact of AI be? Will biased algorithms and LLM hallucinations ever allow us to trust these systems? And the public has been captivated by a hype cycle that has alternately engendered false hope that AI will solve everything, or deep fear about their future in the age of AI. During these extraordinary 5 years, HI has served as a lighthouse.
As the only interdisciplinary institute dedicated to human-centered AI, we saw early on the challenges posed by AI would be pervasive. At the same podium 5 years ago, Feifei stated, quote, "This technology affects real people living and real lives. That makes it our responsibility to understand the full impact of this technology, to anticipate the way that the world will change in response, and to guide it accordingly. In other words, it's time to make ethics a fundamental part of research and development in AI." And HI has done just that. We've established the Ethics in Society Review, the first in academia review that engages a rigorous ethical review before any new research is funded at HI. The Hoffman-Yee program. Our Hoffman-Yee grants fund interdisciplinary teams to address significant problems of scientific, technical, and societal challenges. Across the seed grants, across Stanford's campus, we've seeded over 200 new research endeavors, such as the first structured open electronic health record foundation model for public researchers. Machine learning models that use satellite imagery to identify and track illegal fishing, which significantly impacts the fish populations and ocean health around the world. We established the Digital Economy Lab. In 2020, we recruited Eric Brynjolfsson from MIT to establish the Digital Economy Lab, which studies the effects of AI on the economy and the workforce and will help us ensure that humans are augmented, not replaced. The Society Initiative. In 2022, we realized that just focusing on the economy and policy wasn't enough. So HI established a Society Initiative that is engaged in highlighting the perspectives and needs of civil society.
Reflecting on 5 years, HI has served a critical role that we had envisioned it would, a trusted convener. At our inaugural event, John said, "Now we make no claim to have answers to the many difficult questions raised by AI, but we are committed to convening the key stakeholders in an informed, fact-based quest to find those answers. To do so, we need partners at other universities and in industry, government, and civil society." Over the past 5 years, we have done just that. We have built powerful partnerships and a community that is broad, diverse, and that deeply cares about human-centered AI. HI has developed a robust industry program where we're helping firms understand how to responsibly introduce AI into their enterprise and learning about their challenges and insights. We have worked hand in hand as a trusted resource to the highest levels of policy making, from international governments to the federal government to high-impact states such as California, shaping global conversation about the governance of this technology. The community of academia broadly, industry, policymakers, Stanford colleagues and students serves as a strength of HI. Most importantly, we have provided a space for genuine academic and scholarly inquiry, courageous dialogue and debate about hard questions and controversial issues. We see HI's mission as a responsibility to society. We are stewards of a civilization-changing technology, and HI's mandate is to ensure that it develops in a human-centered manner for our students, for the country, and for the world. We're excited about the future with new endeavors that expand our interdisciplinary perspective, such as team science initiative that we have been launching, like HI Labs. Before we begin this exciting day, we want to extend our deepest gratitude to our supporters who provide the funds that make our work possible, as well as to Stanford's leadership, our faculty community whose perspectives help guide the work, and to the students who inspire us daily. Finally, we want to acknowledge and thank HI staff who work tirelessly with passion and conviction that equals our own during a time when the workload can feel endless. So thank you for coming here today. We hope you enjoy the day, and we really hope you take this advantage to engage in the most rigorous, riveting debates and discussions in the lecture halls, in the hallway, at lunch, at dinner, and throughout the day. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Professor James Landay. James is a professor of computer science at Stanford University and is currently serving as the acting Denning co-director of Stanford High. He specializes in human-computer interaction, and his work at Stanford includes pioneering research in computing and interactive systems, significantly enhancing user experience and technology. Please join me in welcoming James to the stage.
AI is a powerful tool, but it's critical that we design AI systems at the user, the community, and the society level. And you can start by designing with just communities beyond your own direct user population and you will create AI systems that are more likely to have a positive societal impact. I've been working on defining this new model of AI design for the last couple of years, and today I hope to make these ideas clear and speak about the need for a more human-centered view of artificial intelligence. As everyone here knows, AI is taking the world by storm in many areas, from scientific discovery with tools like AlphaFold to natural language processing with usable speech recognition and language translation and powerful agents like ChatGPT, to even AI-driven fashion design. But even before this latest trend, I'd argue that AI has been embedded in our lives for several years. A common place we see AI making negative impact today is in manipulating our social network feeds, causing people to feel bad, or even worse, to be deceived or outraged about what is true. Or we see AI helping judges to set bail or sentencing for suspected criminals in a way that's been shown to be biased by race, as has been shown in studies of the COMPASS program in the United States. Or we've seen AI-based chatbots hallucinating incorrect information that causes a business reputational harm. These are some of the reasons that we founded HAI 5 years ago, with 3 guiding principles. First, AI should be guided by a concern for its impact on human society. This technology is too potent to consider its effects after the fact, compelling us to explore its ethical implications before, during, and after its development. Next, AI should be inspired by human intelligence. The human brain remains the single most sophisticated device in the known universe, and we should strive to learn all we can from its nature, and we can use that knowledge to inspire new algorithms for the future of AI. Finally, AI should augment, not replace human capabilities. With the proper guidance, we believe AI can enhance the qualities that make us human. Because of both the benefits and the negative social impacts, we've seen a proliferation of AI for good initiatives and institutes. And there's 2 main ways that I see these efforts going. The first type is often made up of social scientists who notice and critique the potential or real harms of AI. And that's useful. It might avoid some of the problems after the fact. But we'd like to get to these warnings earlier. How do we proactively design to avoid these issues? The second type of effort, which is both more common and often fails, is when technologists try to go it alone. Typically, AI experts see an important social impact area like education or health and apply AI naively so that it doesn't work out in practice. This has happened repeatedly, but has occurred acutely in short-term crises like COVID. It's also occurred repeatedly over the long term. For example, in 2016, Turing Award winner Jeff Hinton said, "We should stop training radiologists now, as AI will easily surpass humans within 5 years." This has not worked out, not in AI and radiology or a number of other areas. Even worse, these researchers often don't solve the right problems. Instead of trying to replace radiologists, we should augment the radiologist's capabilities. My Stanford and HAI colleague Kurt Langlotz writes in one of his papers, "Will AI replace radiologists is the wrong question." Instead, he wrote, "The right answer is radiologists who use AI will replace radiologists who don't." The big problem is that we as a field do not know how to design AI systems to have more positive human impacts. The way to do this is what I term human-centered AI. Human-centered AI is about the scope of who we study to find our problems, develop our solutions, and evaluate our resulting systems. To do this, we first need to have a user-centered process. That is, to integrate well-known techniques from human-computer interaction and design that account for the needs and abilities of end users of computing systems early and often, and rapidly iterate and improve a design through rigorous testing. This will help us develop AI systems that work for humans rather than futilely trying to replicate humans. But this is not enough. As has been illustrated by some of the harmful examples I mentioned previously, we can't only design around the user. That would be like designing the sentencing system just for the judge, creating a nice user interface so they could understand the data, but that would ignore some of the underlying systemic issues. It would ignore the community that the system impacts, the people who are accused, their families, the lawyers, the victims, their families. We need to understand the issues of the different communities they come from and any structural barriers they might face, for example, racism or housing discrimination, before we can appropriately design that sentencing system. And maybe some of those people that we meet at that community level would actually become users and should be included at that user-centered level of design. But even that's not enough. We also need to understand the impacts and what kind of impacts are on society at large. What does it mean to have a large percentage of black males in prison in the US, or a large percentage of people who are caught using illegal drugs? These issues have immense societal costs. We need to be able to forecast what might happen if the software we're developing becomes ubiquitous and designed to mediate against potential societal impacts. Now you should be asking yourself, that sounds very hard, because it is. But it's especially hard for computer scientists who are not trained to do this type of analysis. And that's why you need true interdisciplinary teams. So not only technologists and AI experts, but also experts from design, experts from the social sciences and humanities, and domain expertise depending on the area. These experts must be true partners on an AI project from the start, rather than added at the end to investigate possible harms. I'm going to run you through what this type of analysis might look like for an example beyond sentencing. So let's talk about autonomous cars. What does human-centered AI analysis look like for this? Here's a Tesla with its autopilot feature. Whether now or in 10 years autonomous cars will happen, it's just a question of how much autonomy and where it is used. But I would claim that the researchers and developers who have been behind autonomous cars for almost 50 years have primarily looked at the user-centered level, i.e. the driver. These other levels, for example, community, including other drivers or pedestrians or bicyclists, have all been an afterthought for these efforts and have led to many of the problems that might have been avoided if they had been considered much earlier on in the conception of autonomous driving, rather than waiting until deploying these in the field and causing problems. Finally, at the society level, we need to consider the impacts of autonomous cars on a city or a region. Maybe the impacts are not as positive as the enthusiasts might lead you to believe. Some studies have shown that autonomous cars will lead to more traffic and more deaths due to driving more miles, people living further away, and sending cars around empty. And I would say these are not just newspaper headlines, but are based on research, for example, by transportation experts at the University of Texas, who found, at least in the Texas Triangle megaregion, Austin, Dallas, Houston, San Antonio, autonomous cars will likely swamp traffic due to the changes that these AI-based cars will bring. With this type of analysis from the start, we might decide our societal resources would be better spent on building a better public transit system. If we only analyze and design at the user-centered level at the start, we might ignore these important questions until it's too late. And these are questions of power. Who has the power to choose what we do with our societal resources? Right now, that power is concentrated, in this case, in big car companies or even tech companies, or in the case of large language models, in only a few large tech companies. So what I want you to take away from this introduction to human-centered AI is that there are many great applications where we can use AI to help people be better at their task, whether it's to augment them to be better learners, better designers, or take better care of their body. The key is to keep users, communities, and society's needs at the center of these smart interface designs. It's critical that we design at these three levels of user, community, and society. We're really in the early days of finding the right design processes to practice truly human-centered AI. You who are out there who are designing building systems can start by just designing with communities beyond your direct user population, and you will create AI systems that are more likely to have a positive societal impact. Thank you.
HAI is devoted to doing the research necessary to make sure that we not only invent good AI tools in the lab, but that we bring them to society successfully and in a positive way.
HAI focuses on interdisciplinary research because AI is going to impact everything in society. It's really important that all of the different fields that we bring to bear in a university have their point of view taken into account.
To create a project that has all those minds moving in the same direction is incredibly hard, but when you get it, it's magical because now you're making decisions with much better confidence that you're doing the right thing.
So we fund research at Stanford in 3 different ways. There's some areas where there's a lot more activity, I think, because those are areas where AI is going to have more impact. So for example, in healthcare,
we're working very hard at building systems that are truly useful to the practitioners who are on the front lines of medicine.
An exoskeleton that could help an elder who's about to fall not fall. Then there's sustainability, helping figure out a better way to develop new batteries or where to mine to be less environmentally damaging, all the way to education.
Our annual AI index is a critical resource. I go across the country and people thank me for being part of the effort in making AI index. Some of them are governments, some of them are just a high schooler doing research in AI.
We founded the Center for Research on Foundation Models 3 years ago. The mission of the center is to provide accessibility and understanding of foundation models as the technology is moving fast at a breakneck speed. Over the last few years, as the technological capabilities have improved, the amount of transparency and openness that we've seen has been declining. One of the things that we are excited to really push forward is the transparency index. By quantitatively scoring companies based on their best practices motivates companies to improve their best practices and also gives the public a view of the status quo. CRFM and HI in general have the ability to help the world to understand this technology better from a neutral perspective.
One of the things we have is trust, because we're not in this for profit. We're a nonprofit educational institution. The public is looking for sources of information about AI that they can trust. The combination of the excellence of all of our other schools plus this position as a trusted source of information makes us in a good position to be a leader in responsible AI.
Please welcome Vanessa Parley, the Director of Research at Stanford High. Vanessa leads research initiatives focused on understanding and shaping the societal impact of artificial intelligence. Her work emphasizes interdisciplinary collaboration to explore the ethical, social, and policy implications of AI technologies, aiming to ensure that AI advancements benefit humanity in equitable and responsible ways. Please welcome Vanessa to the stage.
Hello, everyone. I'm thrilled to moderate the first panel of the day, Mapping the Human Brain and the Science of Intelligence. We have 4 really amazing speakers for you today. They will give a 10-minute presentation, and then we'll move into a bit of a discussion. So speakers, as I call your name, please join me on the stage. First is Professor Mike Frank. Mike is the Benjamin Scott Crocker Professor of Human Biology and the Director of the Symbolic Systems Program here at Stanford. He studies language use and language learning, focusing especially on early world learning. Professor Surya Ganguli is Associate Professor of Applied Physics and, by courtesy, Neurobiology, Electrical Engineering, and Computer Science. He's also a Senior Fellow here at HAI. And Professor Laura Gwilliams is Assistant Professor of Psychology and, by courtesy, Linguistics. Her work aims to provide algorithmically precise account of how the brain acquires, produces, and understands language. And finally, Jeff Hawkins. Jeff is a scientist whose lifelong interest in neuroscience led to the creation of NumMeta and its focus on neocortical theory. His research focuses on how the cortex learns predictive models of the world through sensation and movement. Welcome, everyone. And we will begin the presentations with Professor Mike Frank.
Thanks so much. So I'm here to tell you a little bit about the data gap between human children and large language models. AI models are fascinating, pervasive, sometimes problematic, and clearly here to stay. But what can AI tell us about the human mind? And in particular, can it give us insight into how children learn? Here's my 5-year-old Jonah with 2 of his buddies, and they just learned the game Candyland. What do these natural intelligences have in common with state-of-the-art artificial intelligence? One thing that they both share is that they are zero-shot learners. They can pick up a new game like Candyland just by hearing the rules, having them explained briefly. They don't need a large group of supervised examples that are required to learn any individual new task. They can pick up new tasks flexibly and adaptively. But there's one big difference between large language models and kids. That is the amount of training data they receive. So kids receive in their childhood between tens and hundreds of millions of words of language input from the caregivers around them. In contrast, AI models start to show zero-shot learning around 500 billion words of input, even 1 trillion, and in recent models we've seen tens of trillions of words of input. So this creates a data gap between 3 and maybe as much as 6 orders of magnitude of difference in the data that kids receive and that language models receive. How can we understand this data gap? How do we bridge the gap between human-level intelligence and LLM-scale intelligence? For this, we look to cognitive science and psychology. Psychologists of the nativist variety have often said that actually human children are pre-trained. That is, they come innately endowed with concepts, understanding of social agents, understanding of the physical world. But other schools of psychologists have actually focused on active and social learning. They think children not only have some concepts innately maybe, but they also explore the world, learn from the world around them actively, forming theories and experimenting on the world. And that's what makes them learn so efficiently. Yet a third possibility is that counting words is not the right metric at all. And in fact, the rich sensory data that accompanies each word that a child hears is the most important thing. And of course, we should acknowledge that the comparison between LLMs and children is imperfect at best, right? ChatGPT speaks hundreds of languages, whereas human children are just starting to learn 1 or a couple of languages. So what I want to argue today is that we can use AI models as part of a principled scientific workflow to try to understand and bridge this data gap. And the way we can do it is by training models on children's training data and evaluating them on children's learning outcomes. By doing this, we use the AI model as a cognitive model, as a scientific artifact to reason about learning. And we can contrast different models. So if we have a model with more innate endowment, we can compare its outcomes on the same data that children produce. And if we have a model that actively learns and explores in the world, we can compare its outcomes as well. In this way, we use cognitive models to try to help us learn about the human mind. And this is precisely what my lab tries to enable. My lab builds open resources. We create corpora of videos and transcripts of the language input that children receive from their caregivers. We create databases of experiments on children's language processing. And we curate multicultural, multilingual databases of children's learning outcomes. And we do this all following an open science approach. The idea is that when the research community creates cumulative resources that pool their data, then we can really move forward together on these questions. So let me tell you a little bit about how we began to apply these tools and these ideas in the case of AI training. It starts with a project about 10 years ago where we started to put cameras on the heads of individual children to map out their visual experience. These children, of course, were developmental psychologists, because who else would take the time to 2 hours a week, every week, to map their child's development using a head-mounted camera. And at the end of this exercise, we had 400 hours of video, which we shared openly. The resulting videos were really different than the kind of third-person view that we see in the movies. They feature a much shakier world with objects much closer to the child than an adult would, simply because children have shorter arms. And the adults around the children were acting on the child's world, putting their hands in view, moving things around for the child. At first, we used AI models just to analyze these data. So here you see a pose detector where we could detect the hands and the faces of the caregivers around the child. And we found, consistent with our intuition and with the previous literature, that the hands were much more present in children's field of view than faces, suggesting that hands and manual action is a really important source of learning input for kids. And this was consistent across ages and across kids. But we started to wonder whether we could train models as well on the input that we had gathered, because these input, after all, are the learning input to children. So we took the SACAM videos and we passed them through contrastive learning algorithms. That is, algorithms that were designed to learn visual representations in an unsupervised way. And we found that the representations learned by these algorithms were actually surprisingly predictive of data from brains. That is, there was some consistency in the representations learned from naturalistic data and from brains. But my collaborator Dan Yeamans calls this a glass half empty result, because although we found surprising predictivity, we did not beat the standard machine learning benchmarks like ImageNet. So he came to me and said, Mike, can we do better? Can we get more data? And that led to the BabyView project. So we worked with Daylight Design in San Francisco to create essentially a baby action sports rig, a lightweight GoPro mounted on this comfortable helmet with extra sensors to really get a sense of what the child's actions are in the world. And now my lab builds bouquets of baby views, which we send out to families around California. The goal is to create a corpus that is, in the end, 10 times as large as SACAM, capturing an entire year of child experience, really creating the training data that we need to try to understand these cognitive modeling questions. So the BabyView captures much higher resolution data. It also has a much broader field of view to capture more of the child's social world. We've got 28 families contributing data at the moment, mostly in California. You can see some of them are already mapping just a tremendous amount of their child's early experience through the BabyView. Just to give you a sense of what this looks like, here's a video of our lead, Bria's daughter, who's wearing the BabyView camera as she comes for story time with her mom. So we're now starting to train models on children's training data from BabyView and SACAM. So we take the BabyView data, the first set of data that we're releasing actually today, and we train contrastive learning algorithms again. But now we're able to take a developmental approach and really see what can be learned as we increase the scope of the training data. And what we found is, in fact, what I think is a strong negative result. That is, the best algorithms out there, the state-of-the-art contrastive learning algorithms, in fact, can't reach human performance with the real human training data. The algorithms are simply not strong enough to extract what they need from these training data and be successful. We're also starting to assess models on children's learning outcomes. So we've developed an approach to measuring children's vocabulary that gives us a very large data set about children of all ages, understanding of the visual world and ability to map visual world and visual concepts to words. So this is our visual vocabulary task here taken by a 4-year-old. So she's selecting objects on a tablet. It's fun, it's easy, it's engaging, and this simple task gives us a tremendous amount of data about what she knows. Then we can compare these data to the representations learned by models and assess how human-like they are. What we find is that as models get trained more, they go from matching younger children's performance to matching older children's performance. So although the algorithms aren't perfect yet, they're already starting to recapitulate not just human accuracy in some cases, but also human development. There's much work to do here, but we're very excited about the possibility of making these links between dense human data on the one hand and a more granular view of model learning and model training. So what I've argued here is that we really need to mind this data gap. We really need to be researchers that dig into the reasons for the efficiencies of human learning relative to machine learning. And the way to do this is to create a data ecosystem that allows us to train models on what human children experience and to evaluate them on the learning outcomes that we measure in real children. Thank you very much.
All right, Surya.
Great. So,
Yeah, there have been stunning advances in AI over the last decade, but there are still major capabilities gaps between biological and artificial intelligence. One, which Mike nicely touched on, is data efficiency, right? If GPT-3 read the data that it ingested at the same rate as humans, it would take 20,000 years for it to read that data. Another is energy efficiency, right? Our brain spends 20 watts of power. Large AI systems are in the megawatt to tens of megawatts range, and now they're talking about building nuclear reactors to power them. We don't need those nuclear reactors. Also, explainability is a shared goal between AI and neuroscience. We'd like to understand both how the brain works and how our AI systems work. And now, actually, because of remarkable advances in neuroscience and AI together, we're now poised at the interface of melding minds and machines through closed-loop AI and neuroscience. And so we've been working on all these things, and I'll dive into some of these topics. Okay. Data efficiency, right? There are these scaling laws that have captured the imagination of industry, where the error falls off as a power law with, say, data set size. But the exponents are really shallow. They're slow and unsustainable. For example, to get a few percentage points of improvement, you need to 10x the amount of data. Oh, there you go. And the intuition for this is that if you're just collecting large random data sets, new random data that you collect will be highly redundant with the old data. Okay? So we recently discovered ways to bend these power laws down to exponentials, where a small drop in error just requires a few more data points, which is a vastly superior scaling. And the way we did this is we algorithmically discover non-redundant foundation data sets, small data sets that are capable of training highly performant models. And actually, my collaborator, Ari Marcos, just raised a Series A to take this to the industrial level and build a company called Datology.ai. If you're interested, you can read more about in this paper. Okay. You can also improve data efficiency the way biology has by coupling evolution and learning. For example, in recent simulations, we evolved the morphology, the shape, the body shape of agents over generations, and we trained the neural nets of these agents to perform complicated tasks with reinforcement learning within their lifetimes. And we found within only just 10 generations of evolution, these agents learn twice as fast. And the mechanism is a co-design of the body and the brain. The body shape evolves, and the control circuitry evolves, so it's easier for the brain to control the body. This is joint work with Feifei. Okay. If we go to energy efficiency, how do we go from megawatts to watts? Well, we need new theories that delineate what are the fundamental limits of accuracy of a given computation given an energy budget. And we've been combining thermodynamics and information theory to derive these fundamental limits in the context of biochemical and electrochemical computation. And we also find the circuits that achieve these energy limits. And this provides insights into the mechanisms that yield energy efficiency at the biochemical and electrochemical level. Also, we can now not only measure the entire brain of multiple animals, but we can also, for example, in flies, measure the entire energy consumption at a single neuron resolution across the entire brain of the fly. So we can see how neural activity and energy supply and demand are coupled to each other over space and time. And this reveals that the brain is not only a remarkable information processing network, but it's also like a smart energy grid that predicts how much energy will be required in the near future, and it just meets that demand right at the right point in space and time. So it's very efficient in matching energy supply and demand. Also, more generally at Stanford, my colleague Kwabena Bohannon is building highly energy efficient 3D chips. The reason 3D is important is because most of the power consumption in chips is because of communication, shuttling electrons around. So you want short wires to minimize that. You can't do that in 2D. You've got to build up to 3D. That creates heat dissipation problems. But the brain has solved the 3D heat dissipation problem, and he's using ideas inspired from the evolution of brains as they scaled up over time to design these 3D chips. And you can read all of these papers if you're interested. Okay, so explainability. We'd like to understand both how brains and AI systems work. We can now accurately model the brain using machine learning applied to the brain. But a major question then is, are we just replacing something we don't understand the brain with something else we don't understand our accurate model of it? Okay? We can cut this Gordian knot by using explainable AI applied to our models of the brain and developing such explainable AI techniques to understand this. And so we've done this recently in the retina, where we have had a very accurate model of the retinal response to natural movies. It was a deep neural network. Since it was such a good model, we decided to do 2 decades of experiments that were done in real retinas on our model. right? And every single experiment worked out. It got the right answer. But then the question is, how is it doing that? Conceptually, how does it work? So for each experiment, we developed explainable AI techniques to take this big model and extract from it small submodels for each experiment that were understandable. And they yielded conceptual insight into how the retina was solving these complicated problems. Just one example is the retina actually knows about Newton's first law of motion. And if an object is moving, it will tend to remain in motion. If it suddenly reverses, it violated Newton's first law, the retina sends a huge complaint to the brain, saying, wait a minute, something changed direction, I better alert the brain. So remarkably, the retina already has a predictive model of the world, and it signals violations of those predictions to the rest of the brain. And we could isolate exactly the circuitry in the retina that's implementing detections of violations of Newton's first law of motion. And so this all fell out algorithmically from explainable AI applied to machine learning applied to the brain. And so this cyclic loop can speed up the course of research from decades to a year. Okay, but in neuroscience, we can not only record from the brain, we can also stimulate the brain. For example, my colleague Carl Dijsselroth invented object genetics to stimulate arbitrary patterns of neural activity into the brain. So we can write stuff into the brain. So now we can, for example, record from mice, build models of the brain dynamics, apply explainable AI to understand the models, and then use that understanding to derive optimal stimulation patterns to either actively learn about the brain, derive conceptual insights, or achieve clinically desired control states in the brain. So we can close the loop between neuroscience and AI, and we've been using that in multiple ways. For example, in this collaboration with Mark Schnitzer, we could use AI to read the mind of a mouse. The top row is images that were shown to the mouse. The bottom row is our decoding from the recording of 5,000 neurons in the mouse's brain of what those images were. They're a little bit blurry, but that's because mouse perception itself is blurry. So we're really decoding the percepts of the mouse, and that's quite exciting. We can also use this read-write technology to control the mind of the mouse. For example, we can learn the language of the mouse's brain, how it implements or codes stimuli. Then using that understanding, we can write in patterns, and we could show that by stimulating the right 20 neurons, we could make a mouse hallucinate a particular percept. So if you're interested, the New York Times has wrote up a review of this. Okay, but we're also building these really interesting brain observatories led by Mark Schnitzer at Stanford, using very sophisticated microscopes with 16 lasers simultaneously scanning the brain, or multiple arms recording from multiple brain regions, where we can actually record activity of more than 1 million neurons from multiple brain regions while the mouse is doing a complicated task. So we can start to decipher the logical architecture of how the whole brain works together to solve complicated motor control and sensory perception problems. And so I think this opens up unprecedented opportunities of the neuro-AI interface here at Stanford. And so just to summarize, we're actually building up a really exciting effort, which we call the science of intelligence, building on all the work that Mike and Laura and I and others are working on here. And you can articulate our mission as trying to advance the science and engineering of intelligence, both biological and artificial, hand in hand, to build more efficient, robust, and explainable AI, to bridge these order of magnitude performance gaps. And we're going to meld neuroscience, psychology, computer science, also physics, math to achieve this effort. And it's going to be a highly interdisciplinary effort. It's going to require all of us to do that. Thanks.
Hey, good morning, everyone. I'm very excited to get the chance to share some of my work with you today, which is trying to understand how language is neurally implemented in the human brain and in artificial systems. The idea being that if we can understand how language is implemented in the biological system, we can use that in order to build better machines endowed with language. And we can also use these artificial systems to better understand the biological implementation of language in the first place. So language is extremely relevant for the discussion of the science of intelligence, because language is the foundational pillar of human intelligence. So historically, once humans were endowed with language, this led to a huge increase in the prosperity of the human race in comparison to other biological species. And language is also at the core of a lot of other complex cognitive abilities as well, such as decision-making, logic, and complex thought. And an important note is that Language is not found in any other biological species, which, as I've said, is part of what makes it such an important and interesting thing to study. But it's also what makes it so challenging to study, because the insights that we can gain from animal models are limited. However, this is the point that I want to say as to why human neuroscience is at such an exciting moment right now. And I think this is true for two reasons. So the first is that we currently sit at a paradigm shift in terms of the neuroimaging methods that are available in order to record neural activity from the human brain. And there are two really exciting advances that I wanted to highlight. The first is the invention of optically pumped magnetometers. So these are a way of recording whole brain cortical activity non-invasively. And so these can be used to record from infants, children, adults in a healthy or clinical state. And they can record with millimeter and millisecond resolution, giving us spatiotemporal resolution at the brain's native scale. The other really exciting advance comes from the advances in nanotechnology. So neuropixels probes are one example of tools that we can use in order to actually record single neuron activity in the human brain en masse. So these probes allow us to record responses from hundreds of neurons at the same time in the human brain. And such spatial precision was previously reserved for work with animal models. The other reason why right now is such an exciting time for human neuroscience is that for the first time in history, there exists a system other than the human brain that is able to respond to language in appropriate ways and generate language in appropriate and creative ways. And we can use these systems in order to better understand the human neuroscience of language, but also then, in turn, use the human neuroscience in order to build better systems. Okay. And the work in my lab is taking advantage of human neuroscience data at different spatial scales in order to push the field forward. So on the one hand, as I've already described, using whole brain methods. We're also using methods that can zoom in on a subset of brain regions at a time using invasive electrophysiology. And we're also zooming all the way down to single neurons. And working at these different spatial scales is a really important component of understanding the human brain en masse, so that we can build theories and model neural activity at multiple scales at the same time. Okay. So I want to just give you a very brief insight into some of my work at the two extremes of these spatial scales. So so first I'll present some the approach that we can take when we record whole brain neural activity. So the idea here is that we can ask human participants to listen to a naturalistic stimulus, let's say Michelle Obama's autobiography, and then we can present that same stimulus to an artificial system. So that gives us two systems, both have received the same input. And so that allows us then to make systematic comparisons between what information is contained in the biological and the artificial system. And we can achieve that comparison in two ways. So one approach is to take this audiobook and annotate it for features of language that have been described by linguistic theory. So properties of speech sounds, properties of words, properties of the sentence structure, and properties of the meanings of the words, phrases, and sentences that are being said. So these are features that we can very easily interpret what they mean. And then we can perform the same analogous analysis on the human brain data and on the artificial system. So fit linear probes to see what out of this suite of interpretable language features are encoded in the responses of both systems. And the degree to which they are the same or different tells us something about how those two systems might be achieving language in similar or different ways. Another approach is to actually use one system as the model for the other system. So we can use the activation states in an artificial language system in order to actually predict what that person's neural activity is going to be in response to this stimulus. And this is a much more direct method of bringing the two systems together. However, as Surya already nicely brought up, this has the caveat that this can be harder to interpret. So if you do see alignment between the two systems, it's harder to describe why that alignment occurs. But with advances in explainable AI, we're making progress to essentially being able to get the best of both worlds, to have strong predictive power and to be able to explain where that predictive power comes from. So I also wanted to very briefly touch on some of the results that we have from single neurons in the human brain, and this is using the NeuroPixels probe. So with single neuron activity, we can't record from the whole brain yet. We need to select a single brain area or set of brain areas to record from. And so in this prior work, we decided to zoom in on an area of auditory cortex in the human brain. And using the NeuroPixels probe, we can record from neurons across different cortical layers. And these cortical layers correspond to the neural architecture of cortex. And we can ask very important questions like, when we have access to the fundamental computational unit, the single neuron, what information is encoded in that single neuron? And how are those neurons communicating with one another within and across cortical layers? And here I'm just giving one snapshot of what the data look like from using this approach. So here, each row corresponds to the response of a different neuron. Each column is that neuron's response to a different spoken sentence. And we see very impressive selectivity of the neurons and broad tuning of these neurons to sensory and symbolic properties of language. And this is a really exciting direction because it allows us to make connections to using more biologically inspired neural network architectures, including spiking neural network models. Okay, so I think it's become clear from today's talk that we need to bring together insight both from neuroscience and from artificial systems, essentially to make progress in both domains. We can use very exciting advances in the ability to record data from the human brain to build a better understanding of the human brain, and then in turn endow that into machines to ultimately build more intelligent systems. Great, thank you so much.
All right, there we go. Thank you. I'm Jeff Hawkins. I'm a co-founder of a company called Nementa. And we have a scientific mission. We spent several decades, actually, myself and my colleagues, reverse engineering the neocortex. Our goal is to understand both what it does and how it does it. We want to understand in sufficient detail that we can build systems that work on the same principles. I've always felt that this is the surest path to building true intelligent machines. I still believe that today. Now, some of you may know about my company. We have a commercial product. I'm not going to talk about that. I'm just going to talk about these topics. These are suggested topics for us: mapping the human brain, understanding the science of intelligence, and the future of AI. I've got 9 minutes, not a problem. I have an interesting and fun and exciting announcement at the end, so in case you're going to run out to the bathroom, just come back. You want to hear about it. I think it's going to be important in the field of AI. There's a lot of people, here are just 3 quotes, I'm not going to read these to you, but people believe that our current technology, as great as it is not really truly intelligent, nor will it be the heart of intelligence in the future. Demis Hassabis argues that we should be studying the brain. Many people do that. Jan LeCun talks about the need for AI systems to interact with the world, to learn about the world. We've heard a bit about this morning already. So I agree with these comments. So how do we get started here? You can look at an intelligence system very simply like this. You've got some kind of training data. You feed it into the system. The system builds a model of the data. It's often called a model of the world, but it's really just the model of the data. And then the model is what you use to create an output of the system. The AI world tends to focus on the output. Is this system able to beat humans at certain games? Can it recognize images? Can it translate languages? Can it do math problems and so on? But if you want to understand the science of intelligence and the future of AI, you need to look inside the models and understand them. This is what is important. And there's 2 questions I want to address here. One is, how is knowledge represented in the model? You may not have thought of that, but there is a built-in assumption to every learning system about how knowledge is going to be represented. And that representational structure dictates what that can do or not do, what its ultimate capabilities are, not just what it does today. The other thing is, how is the model trained? What kind of data and how is that data fed into the system? So I'm going to answer these questions about things we've learned about the human brain. The human brain is, I can't see the whole screen here, so I hope I remember the top there. The human brain is what's called a sensory motor system. The inputs to the brain are sense features from our skin, our eyes, and our ears. It comes in, we build a world model, and then the output of a brain is movement. That's all we do, we move. Now when we move, we change what we sense. Every movement you create changes what you sense. We move our bodies through the world, we move our limbs, we move our heads, we move our eyes. There's a constantly streaming craziness of sensory patterns coming into your head, all created by our movement, or mostly created by our movement. So you can't really understand these sense features if you don't know how the system's working. There has to be a feedback to do that. So we think about a sensory motor system like the brain, there's 2 inputs. It's what you're sensing and how you're moving through the world, which are creating most of the changes in that sensation. Here's what's going on inside. This is what we've learned. It's surprising, it's amazing, it's really incredible, but we understand this at a pretty deep level now. Take a simple example of just the tip of your finger has some sensors on it, and you're touching an object like a cup. And as you move your finger around the cup, it changes, the sensation changes. You might feel an edge, a surface, you might feel different temperatures, you might feel texture, and so on. Internal to your brain, in the neocortex, it's keeping track of where your finger is on the object that you're touching. I wouldn't have believed this, but it's true. This is a fact. We understand this very deeply. It's keeping track of a location. And it's using what we call a reference frame. You can think of a reference like a Cartesian coordinate, an x, y, z, but it's not. Neurons have a way of doing this, which is different, which is really interesting. But they're keeping track of location. As you move, the movement vector comes in and changes the location in this internal representation. It is then paired with what's being sensed. So at different locations, as you move your finger, it's saying, aha, at this location I sense this, at this location I sense this, and so on. And when you know what you're sensing, it makes a prediction about where you are. And if you know where you are, it can make a prediction about what you should be sensing. This basic way is how we learn models of the world. We learn by moving and sensing and moving and sensing. Knowledge in your entire neocortex is represented by associating observations with locations and reference frames. It allows the brain to learn structured models. These are models like 3D models and 2D models. You can manipulate these models because they capture the actual structure of the physical world. Today, there are no mainstream sensory motor AI models. We're going to change that. Now, what happens in the entire brain? Your neocortex is composed, it's a very regular structure, and it's composed of about 150,000 cortical columns, each about the size of a small grain of rice. Each one of those is a sensory motor learning module. They're pretty similar. There's small variations, but they're all doing basically the same thing. Your skin is a whole series of sensors, and in each part of your skin is feeding input to a cortical column representing that part of the skin. Your eyes are similar. Know what part of the brain looks at the entire retina. Each column looks at a small part of the retina and is modeling where that thing is observing in the world and what input is coming from it. Now there's two ways, and then there's cortical columns that get inputs from the other columns, shown by the upper layer here. There's two ways these things communicate with each other. There's these lateral connections which unite columns across modalities. This leads to a singular percept. If I hold a cup in my hand and I see it, I don't perceive a tactile cup and a visual cup. I see cup, and yet I have knowledge about both of those modalities, including maybe how it sounds. These lateral connections ties all these models together to leave this singular percept. Now there's hierarchical connections in the brain. These are very well known, but we believe people have misinterpreted them. What they're doing is they're capturing the composite structure, the compositional structure of the world. If I learn something like a car, it consists of maybe doors and windows and wheels and a motor. Each of those are composed of other objects. A wheel is composed of a tire and a rim and a valve and so on. Most of what we know about the world is compositional structure. This room, I'm looking around, I see people, chairs, and windows, doors, all in some structural arrangement. That's what's going on in these hierarchical connections. We learn, and this is how you build a model of the world in this basic simplified version of what I'm telling you here. Now, what do we do about this? The first thing, we gave it this theory a name. We call it the 1,000 Brains theory. I wrote a book about it. It came out about 3 years ago called 1,000 Brains. It's available in like 18 languages now. Many people have read it. And they've reached out to us about it. We internally assigned a small team a couple years ago to see if we could build this. Could we actually build this kind of architecture? And we worked at it for a year and a half or so, and we made a lot of progress. We figured out what the issues were and what the issues weren't, and what the hard parts were, and we're pretty convinced we can build this whole system. We have a lot of work to do, but it's doable. Now, while we were doing this, other people, it turned out, were doing the same thing. There are teams around the world that are trying to build sensory motor learning systems similar based on the work that we've done. I'll give you one example. There's a professor at Carnegie Mellon University, John Shen. For 3 years, he and his team had tried to build silicon versions of these cortical columns based on the 1,000 Brains theory. We didn't know about that until about a year ago. So we know about a lot of people doing this. So just about 2 months ago, we decided to really take this on full steam here. And today, this is my announcement. We're creating a project called the 1,000 Brains Project. It is an open source project. We're going to take all of our existing software and put them in a permissive open source license. We have a whole bunch of patents on this stuff. They're going to take the relevant patents and pledge non-enforcement on them. We're going to build a collaborative environment. We're working with semiconductor companies. We're working with government agencies. I was hoping to talk about some of them today, but I couldn't get it done in time. And academics. We're going to try to pick anyone who works on sensory motor learning to come and work together with us on this. One of the teams that organizations approached us was the Gates Foundation. They are interested in global health, and they see a role for sensory motor learning and AI, but sensory motor learning in global health. That's surprising. Just think about like a sonogram. You're moving a sensor through space, building 3D models. So not only are we going to collaborate with them on applications, but they've decided to fund this project for the minimum of 2 years. This is an amazing thing for us. And we're just announcing it here. I haven't mentioned this to anyone before. It just got signed 2 days ago. This is going to allow us to build out the proper team, the proper structure, the legal formats. We want to do this professionally. This is a serious endeavor, and we'll have to consider about the ethical and societal implications as well. But we're going down that path. All right, so I'm going to end with a few thoughts. We all, I think, all agree that machine intelligence is going to transform the 21st century, much like computer science and computers transformed the 20th century. Where I differ from most people is that I believe sensory motor learning, not today's AI, will be at the technology at the heart of this transformation. I don't have time to make that argument today, but I can. The 1,000 Brains Project, we have hopes for it. We hope, and it has possibility, there may be a seminal event in the creation of sensory motor and truly intelligent machines. We'll see. We're going to do our best to do that. If you're interested in this, there's a QR code. We follow our progress. There's a URL you can do. And if you want to collaborate with us, you want to work for us, you want to make suggestions about this, send an email to 1000brains@nementa.com. Thank you.
All right, thank you all. I have so many questions. I'm trying to
prioritize for time here. So first, I guess I'll start with Laura. You mentioned some of the mapping you're doing of the human brain and comparing that to the algorithms. What are a few key points of differences you're seeing between how the human brain is processing some of this language data versus the algorithms? And then other panelists, I know you all kind of touched on similar points, so feel free to chime in as well.
Yeah, I think one of the key things is that the human brain is extremely representationally greedy, both in terms of time scale and in terms of format of representation. And it's not exactly the AI's fault, because we tend to restrict the system's input to a very long window, which makes it hard to actually represent smaller units than the input that you provide. But I think that every study that I do, I see astounding parallelism in terms of multiple computations happening at once and information being able to restrict hypotheses over information at other levels. So like if you know what the word is, you can use that to figure out what the sounds were, or you can use prior context at varying timescales in order to facilitate the processing of upcoming information.
That's in the human brain versus...
Exactly, yeah. And I think that maybe there's progress to be made of allowing the systems to more freely have access to these different timescales.
Does anyone else want to comment? No? So let's go to... So Surya, you talked a bit about kind of this compute energy efficiency of the brain versus our artificial systems. Some say we just need to put more data into these systems and we'll get to where we need to be. Is there a counterpoint to that, given the difference in how our brain is processing the data?
Yeah, I think on the energy efficiency side, there are these fundamental limits that we understand really well from physics. I think the place where computing went wrong, unfortunately, was the digital decision, right? We decided to store information in bits, which were in turn stored and flipped by shuttling many, many electrons around through complicated transistor circuits. Every fast and reliable bit flip requires, by the laws of thermodynamics, a large energy expenditure. So we expend a lot of energy in the intermediate steps of a computation. Biology is completely different. The final answer is just good enough, and all the intermediate steps are slow, noisy, and unreliable, but not in so unreliable that the final answer isn't just good enough for what's required, right? So it works with mixed analog digital computing, whereas we do things very, very differently. And so I think we have to rethink the entire technology stack from electrons to algorithms in order to really go from megawatts to watts, right? On the data efficiency side, I actually think the picture's a lot rosier. Like the current way we train LLMs, like if we were to apply that to our children, what would we do? We'd give our children a chunk of text and say, hey, by the way, this is the next word. Give them another chunk of text and say, by the way, this is the next word. That's all we do. We'd never do anything else. And if that's what we did, it might take our children 20,000 years to learn stuff, right? So, but we have systems of cultural transmission across generations, systems of curriculum design within a lifetime, active learning where we're not just passively ingesting data, but actively including it, deciding what data we want to study, and so forth. So if we really build all of these things together and have them work with the current machine learning stack, I think we can do a lot better in data efficiency.
I'd like to comment on that too, because as we got into our research, there's a lot of it's very low-level stuff. I didn't even begin to talk about dendrites and synapses and how neurons work. But we've learned a lot about this data efficiency, and of course, there's a real problem in the world today. There's a couple high-level things that I think if the audience doesn't know, we should mention here. In the artificial neural networks we have today, they have all these artificial neurons. They're not really like biological neurons at all, but trust me on that. But they're fully connected. I mean, we have a bunch of neurons fully connected to other neurons and fully connected to other neurons, and they're all active at once. Biological systems is very sparse in two ways. One is, at any point in time, most of the neurons are not active. They're just not active. In fact, when you do probes, sometimes people can't ever find the neuron doing anything, but it does every once in a while. And then they're also very sparsely connected. And what this means, if you think about doing neural calculations as a matrix multiply, which is what GPUs do, instead of multiplying everything by everything every step, the brain only has to multiply 1% of this times 1% of that. And all of a sudden you're at 10,000. And there's other things too, which we think are essential to achieving a real high efficiency. And this is the way the neuron dendrites work. And it's beyond this conference here. But the real neurons have computations that go across the dendritic tree. It's not a singular thing. There's many different computations going on in real neurons. And that plays into the sparsity thing. And a combination of these things just can really reduce the power dramatically. Our company, as well as some other companies around the world, are trying to take advantage of these things to create really much lower power LLMs and other neural networks. And we're making good progress on that.
Good, great, thank you.
I can go ahead. Might add a little bit to that. This is also one of the reasons I'm really excited of the opportunity to record single neuron activity in the human brain for the first time. Because before we never had a ground truth of how this actually looks. So, for example, going to the column idea, if you record neurons in columns of a primate, then you see that all the neurons in a column are essentially doing the same thing. But when we look at that in the human brain, that isn't true anymore. And so there's really important insights into understanding the implementation and seeing how we can then translate that to more energy efficient models.
Mike, since you haven't had a word yet, I'm wondering, you mentioned in your talk about learning from the brain to build AI, but then using AI to learn more about the brain. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Like, what are you hoping to learn? What have you learned so far?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a really exciting moment scientifically, and because what we're trying to do is develop essentially model systems for studying different subparts of cognition, subparts of the brain. So, it's amazing when we completely expand the reach of a science with this, huge new model or something. But I think there's an unsung piece of this development that is actually maybe even more exciting, which is that we take a particular model, architecture, or system, and we create something like a Drosophila, like a mouse model, and we can really understand that. And some of the work that Surya is talking about really builds on that kind of theoretical backbone, where you get something like, in the case of language, it's GPT-2 actually, and this has become the Drosophila for linguistic development. We can probe it, we can sequence it, we can do controlled rearing experiments, and that's just remarkable. And we've seen that happen in language, we've seen that happen now in vision, maybe in somatosensation coming up, right? So that this is the kind of virtuous cycle that happens when there's access to resources, when there's openness about the materials, and when scientists really collaborate to create this kind of playground where we can work together.
All right, yeah, so speaking of, again, like modeling the brain, you all kind of talked about it briefly. And because we were here at an HAI event, what are some of the considerations that we should be taking into account if we are going to map, for example, an entire human brain as we embark on the research, especially if it's open?
Considerations as in what kind of considerations?
Ethical risks, yeah.
I mean, I can speak about the kind of data that we work on, which comes from real humans
yes.
and their whole experience, not just the individual cells. So here we really have to navigate scientific openness as one value and the protection of the privacy and the interests of the families and the children on the other side. And so navigating that has been really key to a lot of our projects. One piece of this is that we're getting more sophisticated about de-identifying some data sets. And so that can really be a way to protect participants while maintaining openness. Another route that we're really working through is how we create systems for scientists and researchers to access data that block some of the negative, potentially harmful actions. Some of those are technical solutions, and some of them are legal solutions and licenses. And so we really, we have to think, my default is, we want this to be open. Our value is openness. And how do we modulate openness with respect to the key ethical concerns that participants and communities would have around our research and our data?
All right. So it occurs to me as a non-neuroscientist that each of you are kind of studying these different types of senses, right? Like language, audio, sensory, motion. Surya talked about retina research. Is this like the combination of your work, the path to AGI?
Well, I'll first talk about the different senses, right? Okay. We think of humans, we say, oh, we have these three major senses, hearing, touch, and vision. That's not true. We actually have more. Even your skin is actually almost like a dozen different types of sensors, and they're really separate sensor systems, and the same true with the eye. And then we look at the animal world, and we see all kinds of other sensors. Fish have electric lines on them, and so one of the things we've learned about the cortex, all mammals have a cortex, is that you can plug in different types of sensors into it, and they all seem to work. So part of our work is to understand like what are the basic principles that you have to have of any sensory system to be able to use it in these sensory motor learning systems. They don't have to be human-like at all. And we talk about the future of AI. Some people think like, oh, we're going to build these robots that are like humans. Well, we could, but I don't think that's what it's going to be like, all right? It's all kinds of embodiments, all kinds of sensors, all kinds of time frames where these principles can work. And so the embodiments that we see in the future of AI will not be like robots running around. There'll be some of them, but mostly not like that. And I just wanted to comment on your question about the different sensory modalities. Yeah. We look to extract out what the different what is the essence of each sensory modality, so we don't have to worry about the details of them. So the system can work if you plug in an eye, you plug in a sonar, you plug in something else, and all that is possible.
Go ahead.
I do think that bringing together different modalities of input as well as different optimization functions, like different tasks that the AI is trying to solve, is really important. Even if you end up using that AI for one particular task, like say language, we don't learn language in a vacuum. We use it to obviously communicate with other people, but it's also a way of making sense of our visual world, of our auditory world. And so I think bringing together multiple forms of input in different formats for then being then used for different output purposes is going to be really important step.
Yeah. I actually think what we're kind of missing is like the higher order control circuitry that ties together the sensory inputs, commands the motor outputs in a sensory motor loop where our motor actions have future consequences, and then being able to deeply logically reason through multiple cycles of the sensory motor loop to imagine the future and make plans based on that. I think that's where the big thing that's missing. These LLMs are really not good at deep logical reasoning where many deductive steps need to be taken. And I think what evolution has done is it's factorized this deep logical reasoning in a sensory motor loop into a gross architecture of sensory, motor, and executive control areas. And if you look at how brains have scaled up over evolution, there's beautiful data on this, where you see like various animals from rodents to monkeys to humans scale their brains in one common way. Like some parts of the brain scale much larger, the executive control circuitry that ties everything together, and some parts scale at a much smaller rate, like the early sensory areas. And so that you have these different scaling relationships between different brain areas that are conserved over hundreds of millions of years of evolution. And we have zero design principles to explain how a complicated sensory, motor, control, energy distribution network can continuously scale over 800 million years without ever losing function. I think the secret is figuring out what these design principles are and instantiating them in our AI systems. Right now, we scale transformers just by adding layers, maybe increasing the embedding dimension, and that's it, right? We don't have deep principles there.
I think I agree with all that, but I'd like to add something else that we learned, which was surprising to me, actually. We tend to think of motor function as some sort of add-on to sensory perception, and that's the early neuroscientists thought that. But here's a biological fact. Every cortical column in your brain, every one, even the ones that just get the primary input from the cortex or primary from the tip of your finger, every one of those cortical columns has a motor output. It projects subcortically to some part of the brain that moves something. So motor output is not something that happens only one place. Something happens every place. So if you want to get to what Surya was just talking about, you have to understand how motor function and motor planning is not something that occurs only one place. It occurs everywhere all at once. This is why sensory motor systems are not just sensory plus motor. They're sensory motor everywhere. There's no hyphen in that word. It's just one thing. So I think part of the principles that Surya was talking about, you have to recognize this inherent embeddedness of motor output that is surprising, but it's a fact. It's biological fact. You can't ignore it.
Yeah, you asked in your question about general intelligence, and I think you're hearing from all of us that there's this missing piece, which is the connection of sensation to reasoning, decision making, and action. And that's really what we see right in the behavior of organisms. They explore, they learn, they play. They are curious, they acquire information from the environment, and that kind of system is one that I think we're really just starting to figure out how to measure, in part because of the incredible flexibility and the complexity of naturalistic play, naturalistic exploration. So creating the data sets, creating the resources that allow us to study that broader loop is one of the big challenges that I think we're going to be facing in the next 5 years.
Yeah. Is there... So we know that there's this gap. Is there different types of opportunities for the artificial intelligence to more augment our biological intelligence versus?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, some things that we're working on are collaboration are things like memory prosthetics, where like you can imagine a sci-fi future. This is not what we have right now, but a sci-fi future where
I feel like you all are at the sci-fi future in your work.
Where you can imagine an AI system that's seeing stuff that you're seeing through a camera. It can stimulate your brain, maybe, and then if you forget, say, where you left your keys, it can detect that that's what you're looking for, and then write in a pattern to tell you where your keys are, right? That's a sci-fi future that is conceivably possible. We can already do that in mice, where we can reinstantiate old memories in mice by stimulating the right set of neurons, right? Talking about the sensory motor loop, in one of the papers I had with Mark Schnitzer a couple of years ago in Nature, when we recorded from like eight different brain regions, while a mouse is doing a decision-making task, we could literally see the upcoming decision before the mouse takes an action is communicated back to the sensory areas along an information channel that's perpendicular to the channel where sensory input comes in, and it goes all the way back to visual cortex. So like the decision that the mouse makes is broadcast to all the early sensory areas. It's like telling the sensory areas, hey, I'm about to do this. So like if you see the consequence of that, don't worry about it. Like, the sensory motor loop that Jeff is talking about is really like everywhere.
I'm personally, I agree with what he said. And people are trying to build these integration of brains and machines. And you got Neuralink trying to put probes in your head and try and merge you with machines so they don't take over the world, things like that. I'm not a fan of that. Brains are really, really complex, messy. They're messy, wet things that pulsate and die and move all over the place. And trying to create some sort of permanent, high bandwidth, high capacity connection to a brain. We can do pretty low bandwidth stuff and pretty low numbers, but really like merging a machine in the brain, it's going to be very difficult. But more importantly, I don't think we want to do that. At least I don't want to do that. It's what's the goal of that, right? I take a higher level view. We should be thinking about how do we, as humans, survive? How do we live? Artificial machines can help us. They can save us. They can perhaps, prevent our own demise. But I don't think we should do that by merging our brains with them. They should be tools for us. They should be tools that allow us to do things that we can't do or we need help with. In various ways. So it's a personal bias. I don't think that is much of our future, brain machine. People who are paralyzed, absolutely, this is important stuff to help them live. But a normal, healthy human, I don't know. I don't think we're all going to have cables coming out of our head someday, but I could be wrong.
I saw Surya lean forward a little bit. Did you want to add something?
Just to articulate, you mentioned paralyzed patients. That's an incredibly useful use case. I'm a part-time venture capitalist, and we actually funded a really great company that can restore speech to patients who haven't spoken for 30 years. You basically ask them to imagine speaking, you record from ECOG electrodes in their brain using a very simple surgery, and you decode the imagined speech, and then boof, then they can use the interface and they can talk for the first time in 30 years, which means although they're paralyzed at the periphery, their language circuits, which Laura studies, are intact. They have very similar memory, which means that when they're thinking, they're presumably thinking with their language circuit. So there's these ancient debates about whether or not thought and language are separate, right? And this provides some information that they're at least so tightly coupled enough that if you haven't spoken for many years, but you've thought, your language circuits are still intact, right? Which is remarkable. And now this can be, there's a market for this. You can make money off of this. People, venture capitalists are betting on this, right? Anyways, it's exciting, I think.
Laura, I don't know. I know Surya mentioned your work. Do you have any comments on that or?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that brain-computer interfaces at BCI for the purpose of restoring speech to people who don't have that ability is, it's like now. And people with these implants can use these systems, which do use tools like large language models to help make sense of the neural responses that are going on in that person's brain to actually read out something that they are intending to say. And people have these systems in their homes so that they're actually, for the first time in 30 years, they're able to have a conversation with their loved ones. And I think that is a very obvious place where we're already seeing AI is able to augment human abilities in order to kind of fill the gap that was lost.
All right, so we only have a few minutes left. What I thought we would do at the end, and you've all kind of touched on this probably, but we could do round robin of what you are most excited about at the intersection of AI, neuroscience, science of intelligence. It could be within your field or tangentially. We'll start with Mike.
Sure. So I really think that this intersection of the kind of virtuous loop of AI development and the scientific ecosystem, the scientific modeling ecosystem, is really just revolutionizing individual subfield by subfield. And that's just incredibly exciting. I think we've seen this start first in visual neuroscience, where we have imperfect but incredibly useful models of feed-forward visual processing, of how the visual system takes in information, and we can really use that as a tool to refine our understanding of the brain, and then in turn feed that knowledge of the brain back to back to the design of visual recognition agents. That loop is just starting to happen in language and linguistics, and I think, as a cognitive scientist, it's just amazing to watch us realize that we were wrong about so much stuff, right? We thought for 50 years that just making a grammatical sentence was going to be the hard part. And it turns out that was incorrect. That wasn't the big problem. And so as we use language models and increasingly multimodal models as these basic scientific tools, we can really investigate what the hard problems are, the nature of representation, the nature of knowledge, and seeing that virtuous cycle starting to work its magic has just been amazing.
Surya, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm super excited about neuroscience and AI and everything in between. For the first time on our planet, before just a couple of years ago, we used to have like one intelligence system, humans. For the first time on our planet, we plausibly have a second intelligence system. These large language models, these generative models. I mean, they're not, there's still differences, but they are really interesting. They have lots of emergent behaviors that we don't understand. As a physicist and an applied mathematician, my entire career has kind of been defined in various fields by how does emergent behavior emerge from underlying degrees of freedom that don't have the same properties. In this case, how does intelligence emerge from interactions of many non-intelligent systems like individual neurons? And we can start to study like commonalities and differences in principles of emergence of intelligence from distributed nonlinear circuits. And I find that incredibly exciting. It's a playground for physicists, mathematicians, computer scientists, theorists. And it has implications for human health and for AI and society. It's incredibly exciting. And I actually love being at Stanford, where I can talk to people across many different fields and make progress.
Laura, go ahead.
Yeah, so if I have to pick one thing...
You could pick two, too. Depending on how much time you take. Yeah.
Okay, I'll pick two. For me, it's the explosion of progress in our ability to finally record activity from the human brain with the precision that, as I said, is only possible previously in animal models. And human neuroscience has really been behind the curve in being able to understand things like, well, anything essentially that is a complex behavior that is not observable in anything other than a human. And we're only now able to actually catch up in being able to understand how intelligence emerges in the human system, because only now we have access to the right kind of data, which is neural data from the human brain. And as I said, I think it's really important to have both the whole brain view, so you can understand how the network at large is communicating and giving rise to these complex behaviors. It's never one single column in isolation, it's the entire network. But it's also important to be able to zoom in on how things are implemented at the single neuron level, and being able to do both and understand how the whole network arises from single neuron activity in the human brain for the first time ever is really, really exciting. I think this is what is going to push the field forward. I just did one.
Well, I've spent over 40 years trying to make the intersection of AI and neuroscience. It's been a long challenge. So I'm excited about the whole field. You can tell probably from my talk, I'm just excited about this stuff. And I agree that, what we haven't had in the past is good human data, right? We've had a lot of other animals, but fortunately all mammals have a neocortex, and most people think dogs and monkeys are smart in some ways. And so even rats. And so, there hasn't been, in our work, there hasn't been a paucity of data because there's so many animal studies. I mean, unbelievable number of animal studies that have never been assimilated into any kind of theoretical framework. So there's an incredible amount of data out there. It's not human data. But I'm excited the fact that I think we're actually able, as you could hear me talk, we're actually on the verge of building machines that are sensory motor that work on the same principles as biological systems. And I think that's going to happen very quickly. So I kind of look at this century as like, this is going to be an amazing century. I'll be around for a little bit of it. But we can all participate in making that happen.
Awesome. All right. Well, let's give our panelists another round of applause.